Before that, a few words about the context in which we are conducting this discussion. As it goes, there is a beautiful quotation by the first Prime Minister of India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, in the 1956 convocation ceremony at IIT Kharagpur. Here in the place of that Italy detention camp stands the fine monument of India, representing India's urges, India's future in the making. This picture seems to me symbolical of the changes that are coming to India. Ever since 1956, the saga of IITs have been with ups and downs. Several new institutes have been added. There have been changes in the structure, curriculum, what they stand for, and it's still a contested issue between in the academic circle, in the political circle, and wherever India is represented. So now we are conducting this panel discussion at a juncture when a committee report has come out which suggests, if not in so many words, that IITs have to find their own means of meeting their expenditure, which would actually mean hiking of the fee up to 2.5 lakhs for at least for the undergraduates. So naturally, students are concerned, but those are not the only questions which are being raised. We have several perspectives here, and even the student representation which is conducting this event is more of a rainbow coalition, if you want to put that word, because we have perspectives coming from various political, economic and social backgrounds. We have the authoritarian right to the libertarian left perspectives within this coalition. We have people who are bothered about the social consequence of how much does IIT pay back to India. There are people who are bothered about their own jobs and security. We have enough number of arguments and contests within ourselves. So the purpose of this discussion is basically to bring some clarity into the matter. First of all, we would like to address the question of private higher education. I'm sure that the panelists will be dealing with this issue. How do they perceive higher education? What are the goals? And is privatization a good move in general, or is it happening? There are even that is a contested question, whether privatization is indeed happening or it's just a structural change, or quote unquote. So with this, let me introduce today's panelists. We have Professor Rahul Siddharthan, who is a computational biologist working with Institute of Mathematical Sciences, which all of you might know is quite nearby. He is also he writes in The Hindu on various social and issues pertaining to Indian academics. He is also, as I know, an active blogger from the academicians. So, Professor Rahul, could you please come on to this? Then we have Professor Dr. Venkatesh Athreya. He is also an alumnus of this institute. He was 64-69 batch chemical engineering from IIT. Then he shifted his gears to economics. He did his PhD from discussion medicine. He has been a faculty at IIT also, the humanities department, and then worked as the head of the Department of Economics in Bharathidasan University. He is again known to in the academic circle regarded as a person who has opinions and who make certain points regarding issues including higher education. So we welcome Professor. Third, we have Mr. Jimraj Milton, and he is an lawyer practicing at Madras High Court. He is a part of Human Rights Protection Center of Tamil Nadu, and he has worked on bringing a uniform syllabus in Tamil Nadu. He has worked in many fields related to education and social issues. Yeah, recently he has filed several PAs related to education issues. So he is sort of an activist too, and we would like to hear his suggestions, and we welcome him. So now this is how we have thought. This is a panel discussion. So basically, my purpose is only to introduce the speakers and perhaps hand over the mics or identify some of the potential opinion makers or whatever you want to call that. So we'll have the first round of panel discussion as in 15 minutes. We are not keeping it a very hard and fast boundary. 15 minutes each, and each panelist can express their opinion regarding the subject. We have not placed any restriction. There is bound to be a lot of differences, and that's the beauty of it. We want to bring together certain perspectives. So 15 minutes in one order, and we'll have a comeback session between the panelists. So if there is a specific point about which one of the panelists would like to make a suggestion or make an opinion about, they will have the chance to get that, and that would be the reverse order the reverse of the order that is followed. Now, after this, we'll throw a section open to the audience, and I have a request. If you have, and I'm sure you will have a lot of comments to make, so please be brief in your question. Let's not take more than 1 minute to say a question, and be very specific. So with these words, let me hand over the mic to the panelists. I request Professor Rahul Siddharthan to address or put his perspective on stage.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me here. I'm actually not sure what my qualification is for being here, but as you're told, I do blog a lot and I've written a couple of film articles. So, I mean, anyone who has an opinion can express it, and I have mine and I sometimes express it. So, I guess that's good enough. The topic is broadly privatization of higher education, and more specifically, I believe something to do with fee hikes going on, proposed at the IITs, proposed and partly implemented. And so just at the outset, my presence here is not going to be construed as supporting one point of view or the other. I really don't know enough about the details of the IIT situation to really make a statement on it. So with that out of the way, so I don't think one can, yeah. It's not audible. Okay, so with that out of the way, I don't think we can talk about higher education in isolation without talking about education in India in general. And we've all been through the education system in India. Cases like me, I've studied in India throughout, and some of you, I guess students here are doing undergraduate degrees at IIT or postgraduate here after having done undergrad somewhere else, and some of you will go abroad for further studies and some won't. But we kind of know what things are like here. And just as a sort of survey, how many of you went to a government school before coming here? That's a very impressive number. I'm quite surprised that. Of those, how many were Cambridge, the others? So the rest of you went to government schools other than Cambridge, the others, before coming here. The question was how many of you went to a government school as opposed to a private school, high school, before coming here? Yes, I'm quite surprised at that number, and that is quality of government schools. I know some of them are better than others. The KVs in particular are at a high standard, but that to me reflects a little bit the cynicism of the government, that government employees deserve a better deal than the rest of the country. Now, there is no reason why a government that runs the IITs, which are best in the class in the world, and some good universities and the KVs and so on, cannot also provide a good education to the rest of our 1 million people. And the fact is, we call ourselves a socialist country, and we are completely failing to provide primary education, healthcare, social security, food security, the list goes on. We are socialist in name only, and in practical aspects, we tend to be the ultimate free market country. The person who has the money makes the rules. So I was going through the work plan report of the Planning Commission, and it actually says many of the same things that I'm saying. So according to the Planning Commission, during the 11th plan period, that is 2007 to 12, the aggregate public spending on education is estimated as roughly 12 lakh crores for center and states taken together. About 43% of which went for elementary education and 25% secondary and 32% for higher. So we are spending as much on higher education as on secondary education. If you look at the central government alone, it's something like 39% for elementary, but 50% for higher education. And even recognizing that elementary education is low budget, that higher education teachers get paid less and you don't need laboratories and things like that, it still seems a very skewed perspective. But as you know, the fact is that the best primary schools and middle schools and high schools tend to be privatized, at least in cities like Chennai and Bangalore and Delhi and so on. Most students from a even modestly affluent background prefer to go to private schools rather than to government schools. But once you come to university, it's completely reversed. Despite everything, very few private universities have achieved the standard of, say, Delhi University or Pune University, and very few private engineering colleges have reached the standard, none have reached the standards of IIT. And I'm not sure what the reason for that is. I will talk about that a little bit. But we do have effectively a privatization of primary education and not a privatization of higher education. And the government has recognized this reality in the RTE Act by mandating that private schools take 25% of their students from economically weaker sections without charging the fees, which is a necessary idea in principle, but it is an admission of failure on the government's part in not providing for those weaker sections. Right. So let's talk about the IITs. The IITs, as I said, are the best in the country and of international standard, but it depends on what you mean by that. If you look at any international rankings, they barely figure on the list in reality. And that is in fact a fair assessment. There is some outstanding research that happens at the IITs, but as a fraction of the total, there is also a lot of deadwood, and historically the IITs have been more focused on undergraduate teaching, and that is what they are known for. Even in India, they are not really known for research. So the Indian higher education policy since Nehru's time has been sort of screwed up in that certain elite research institutes, including the one I'm part of, have been sort of pampered. And at the next level, the IITs and to a lesser extent other engineering colleges have been pampered for training so-called professional degrees. That also includes some medical colleges and IIMs and so on. And at the lowest levels, the universities have been left to standing. And the result of that 60 years after independence is that our universities are really in miserable shape, even the best of them. And even the IITs have not achieved what they could have. And so the question, those of you who are not very happy with how things are going at the IITs, I know the fees are part of the picture, but they are not the full picture. The full picture is, even given the fees that you're paying, are you getting the sort of education that you have a right to expect by being at one of the best places in India? Now, let's look at the fees at the moment. So, as I understand it, the fees have recently been increased by about 40% from 50,000 a year to something like 90,000 a year, which is, if you add on hostel fees and so on, it might be close to that. This is still, before revision, it was actually lower than the fees at the NITs, which used to be called RICs. They were 3% NITs and attempts to make them par with IITs. I expect those fees will also be revised. Now, taking all this into account, if you look at the operating budget of an IIT, it's the amount that is collected by fees, even in the best case, even if they increase fees all the way to 2.5 access, the amount that is listed, is still going to be a tiny fraction of the expense of the IIT. And the government, in fact, puts a huge amount of money into the IITs in every age, from maintenance, upkeep, salaries to financing research grants, conferences at every level. And I think right now probably it's well over 100 crores a year per IIT. I don't know the exact numbers. The point is, any money that the government spends is taxpayer money. It's money that you and I pay, either as income tax or sales tax or other kind of tax. It's out of one pocket and maybe into the pockets of others. Now, what should the government be focusing on? There is no doubt in my mind that they should focus on primary education and care. There is also no doubt in my mind that they should be focusing on building the IITs into the best institutes they can possibly be, not just the IITs but others. Also, we need several institutes of world class so that, let's say, somebody who's graduating from Harvard and looking for a job will think of an IIT as one of the top choices to come and work in. That requires not just competitive salaries and infrastructure, but to work, entire change in mindset. Right now, it's actually quite difficult for people from abroad to get jobs in India. So this sort of small world mindset that we have has to go. The IITs have to be international institutes. Now, the question is.
Excuse me, can we have a volume? We can't really make out what you're saying.
Okay, so I'm sorry. There's no doubt in my mind that a lot of government money is required to build the IITs to an international standard, which they are sort of barely at right now, but they can be much more visible. Now, the specific point of are these fee hikes justified? And I would put it the other way around. For those who can pay this kind of fees, are they getting their money's worth? And I think by international standards, the answer is definitely yes here. IIT education is a bargain even at the highest level of fees supported. Now, there are of course people in the country who cannot pay these kinds of fees, and the government claims that they will be considered and helped by way of scholar. Basically, the MHRD has said, if I remember right, that nobody will be denied an IIT education merely on grounds of inability to pay. What the Planning Commission proposes is a student financial aid program at the national level, which covers costs at all levels, undergraduate, postgraduate, doctoral, even postdoctoral. Doctoral and postdoctoral, you don't pay fees. You are actually given a stipend, which needs to be made competitive by international standards. But they determine scholarship amounts and earmark a proportion for different communities and so on. So great details. And if they can make good on this promise that anyone who needs assistance will be given it, that I think is the maximum one can ask for and demand from the government. But any idea of fairness suggests that those who can pay should do so. And how many of those who make it to the IITs can pay? Well, I'm not sure of the answer, but unfortunately the reality is that most people who make it to the IITs at least the undergraduate level have already paid mind-boggling sums in some cases for tuition classes that in some cases start from even 6th or 7th standard and extend all the way through their teenage years. So people who come into IIT sometimes have sacrificed a large fraction of their childhoods, coaching camps in Kota and so on, where they dip and breathe 24 hours to the IIT JEE exam. Thankfully, the IITs realized it's a problem and they are sort of reworking the exam to change the system. But you could put this two ways. You're already filtering out people who can't afford these coaching classes, because if you can't afford it, you can never get in. Or you could say that you have already exploited them by making them pay for these coaching classes, now you're again making them pay for the education. Now I feel that you should be asking them to pay for a good education if they can, and you should not be asking them to pay for coaching classes. The entrance system should be rethought in some way. Now, what do we do about higher education in India in general? The IITs are up there in India, but they are not good enough. The disappointing thing to me is that private education, in fact, has not stepped up. You have a proliferation of private universities now since the deemed university craze is caught on. Not one of them is even remotely close to, well, the BITS and a few other older ones are doing well. And hopefully people like Azim Premji will succeed in setting up some new private universities that are of a better standard. But the majority of these things that you see here, the graduates are essentially unemployable and they are money-making institutions. Now, I'm sorry, yeah. So, what we need to do is think of a way to exploit private capital to get quality education into the hands of people who need it. And this is what America did in the 19th century. In many ways, there are parallels between America of those days and us today. They both are fairly lawless places. There are these robber barons like Carnegie's and Mellons and Rockefellers and so on who amassed untold millions. But for some reason, they gave back to the country in terms of education, and America is still reaping the benefits today. And over here, the Birlas and the Tatas did that to some extent, but not at anywhere near the same scale. And today, Premji is trying it, but the majority of our plutocrats don't seem to have any interest in education or in changing system. The final thing is that the world is changing and online courses are taking off all over the world. Maybe at some point the IITs will become irrelevant and everybody can go to Coursera or Khan Academy and get an education that is the equal of anything somebody from IIT will get. I actually kind of think that they may not be followed. So maybe all this debate is kind of irrelevant from that point of view. Okay, with that I think I'll stop and hand over the mic.
Very perceptive audience, which doesn't take statements for granted easily. So I know we have to be on our toes. But let me just say that I'll start with one or 2 points of agreement from what Rahul said. We certainly can agree that the expenditure for primary education by the state, central and state governments combined in India, has been awfully low. To me, that is no argument for saying that expenditure on higher education should also be low. It's clear to me that even if you take the promise made in the first version of the UPA government in 2004, which was a statement to the effect that they would raise the combined expenditure of the centre and the state governments in India on education to 6% of GDP. And this is the number which came from the 1964 Kothari Commission report, which talked about 6% of GDP as being a reasonable figure to spend on all levels of education. And the fact is that if you take the expenditure of the state and the central governments put together till now, it's rarely ever crossed 4%. It's been less than 4% of education, of the GDP. So the first point I want to make is that we need to spend as a country much more on education, and given that the state has the constitutional responsibility in a sense for ensuring access to education, it follows that we must get the state and central governments to do this kind of spending. Then the question arises, of course, where do they get the money from? Where are the resources? I think this is the important question, that in the last couple of decades, we've got used to a model of economic growth where the assumption is you have to incentivize private investors And in order to incentivize private investors, you have to keep taxes very low. And if they evade taxes, you have to look the other way. So for example, we find that if you take the last 4 years, in 2008 when we had a major global economic crisis, and we offered certain concessions in respect of excise duties, customs duties, corporate income taxes, and personal income taxes. If you go to the site of the Ministry of Finance, indiabudget.nic.in, you have a nice chapter 4 there. And it tells you, it uses a very peculiar, very quaint term called tax expenditure, by which what they mean is revenue foregone by the government on account of concessions provided to private players, essentially. And this tax expenditure for the financial year 2011-12 was of an astonishing 5.7 lakh crore rupees. The budgeted tax expenditure, quote unquote, is 5.3 lakhs or something crores for the year 12-13, but believe me, it will be exceeded. So over a couple of years, we have actually handed out about 11 lakh crore rupees to the corporate sector in the hope that this will incentivize them to undertake investments without regard even to what kind of employment, what quantum of employment that kind of incentivization creates. So we have a model of economic growth now in the country. By the way, this is astonishing that we can talk about India being a socialist country. I mean, India has always been, since independence, a country that has been led, driven by the motive of private profit. The state has played a certain specific role in the Indian economy. And it will take me too long to go into that. Now, being an economist, I'll be inclined to do that. I want to avoid that. But to put it in a nutshell, we can say that from 1950 to till about 1990, we had the state undertaking certain major investments in the areas of education, health, infrastructure, and so on. And in the main, the profit-making activities were in the private sector. So we've always had a profit-driven economy. Don't forget that even at the 2011 census, about half your workforce is in agriculture. That's almost entirely private. Don't forget that much of trade and commerce is private, and much of small industry, all of small industry is private. All unregistered manufacturing is private. A lot of the service sector is private. So the question of India being a socialist country doesn't even arise. I mean, it's a complete misconception. We've always been a capitalist country where we've not even managed to attack landlordism in the countryside. That's a talk for a separate occasion. But right now I would say that in the context that we are discussing here, in the area of higher education, including the IITs where I, as you've been told, had the opportunity of studying, if the government's argument is that we don't have the money to fund IIT education, that is patently untrue, because as Rahul himself was saying, a lot of the expenditure is borne by the government, and the fees really is a very small part of the revenues that come in. Now, if it is a very small part of the revenues, why the hell are you hell-bent on raising it? I mean, it's not going to account for much at the end of the day. So if you're serious about higher education, find the resources. Now, it's a very different argument to say, different context to say, that what do we do with kids who graduate from IITs? So that I can make an appeal to you, which is very different from the argument we're making here. That is, given that about 65% of total tax revenue in this country comes from indirect taxes. Taxes that are paid when you buy a packet of biscuits, or when you go eat in a hotel, or when you buy a box of matches, and about taxes which are to a considerable extent paid by the working poor. So that was talking about you and me being taxpayers. You and I are not taxpayers in the serious sense of the word at all. It is the poor of this country, the working poor of this country, who are the major taxpayers. Although they never appear on NDTV television screens as taxpayers. The guy who appears is quoted and suited. But the fact is, 65% of revenue comes from indirect taxes, and the bulk of it is paid by ordinary working people when they buy things. Now, in that sense, all of us who get educated in India have some part of our education financed by our working people. So we have some obligation to them in some moral sense, but I don't even want to make moral argument. I think it's great joy working here. Teaching in India and working in India is just great fun. That's a separate topic for a different day. We are not discussing that now, so let's not mix up these two different issues, which some people tend to do. Let's just focus on the argument for raising fees. And that's what I want to catch. The argument for raising fees from the government side seems to be that we have a deficit, a fiscal deficit. we are not able to make it up, and there's no way we can go on spending more money than we're getting, and therefore we must necessarily raise fees. And then the second argument comes in saying, IIT kids are affluent, fortunate, why should they not pay? No, this is conflating two different arguments. I want to address the first argument. Does the government of India seriously believe that it has exploited all possible avenues of resource mobilization, and therefore it cannot raise further resources in an area where in the country's own interest it would be good to have a lot of investment going in? Don't forget that economists have been saying this for a long time. Education is a public good, in the specific sense that if a person is educated, it benefits not only the person concerned but the country as a whole. Likewise with health. Why do we invest in public health? Because the healthy individual helps to have a healthier society as well. If people fall sick all the time and communicate diseases to others, it's a serious problem. So these are areas, education and health, the two areas where the private rate of return to the investing individual is lower than the social rate of return to society as a whole. So there's a logical argument in mainstream economics, even in mainstream economics, let alone more radical economics, even in mainstream economics, which is generally very right-wing, even in very right-wing mainstream economics, there is an argument for saying that the state should undertake investments in education and health without regard to profitability, without regard to profit and loss calculations. And therefore, here is a case where from primary to the highest level of education, subsidies are warranted because we want to create an educated India. And we want to do that because we believe that such an India would enable us to achieve larger goals that we set for ourselves. Now, it's possible that 2%, 3% of this pool of educated persons will leave for some other countries, for greener pastures. That can be tackled differently. For example, you can ask a hiring company abroad to pay a certain tax to the government of India for the investment made in the education of the individual concerned. That's a different issue. Let's not conflate these issues. Right now, you have every reason to argue with the government of India that if you are serious about higher education, if you are serious about the contribution IITs and IIT students and products make to the country, then this is an investment well worth making. If some people can afford to pay, that's a different issue. They can pay it in other ways. They can, you can't make it a general rule and then try to seek exceptions. The standard answer of the government when you raise this is that we're not, coming in the way of anybody's opportunity, we'll give them loans. The question is the planning commission deputy chairman may say, give us loans. The banks have to give it. The banks seek collateral. And then you have to pay interest. It's not as if anybody who goes to the bank for an educational loan gets a loan right away, nor is it that you have rates of interest that are affordable. In fact, right now I'm reading stuff from the US economy, which talks about a major student loans crisis in that country as a result of this kind of government abdicating responsibility with respect to education. Now, the question of privatization is a bit of a red herring in the sense that, there's been always private players in education, from primary to higher secondary. In the old days, these were philanthropic types who made the money elsewhere and were possibly trying to wash the sins here. Whatever the reason, there was a fair amount of, charitable private investment in education. That has ceased to be now because of the change in the cultural milieu, which is now totally profit-driven, with hardly any room for. If the occasional philanthropist that Rahul referred to, I don't want to name individuals, would not make an iota of difference. The system as a whole generates inequality and constantly, enhances inequality. And I think within that, to single out the IIT student as somehow an elitist recipient of benefits is quite a wrong picture to make. I believe that in the interest of India's own development, we should be investing in higher education institutions just as much as we should be investing in primary education. And we should do that across the board. The point is well taken. Why single out IITs? In fact, I would say, although many of my batchmates in our group email were violently opposed to this, I was in support of 100 IITs. Why not? We're a big enough country. Okay, and NITs, support them. Nobody is saying don't support the NITs. When you raise the IIT fees and we protest, you say, no, but the NITs. All the time, at other points in time, you're not talking about the NITs. So, my point is, logically speaking, if the government of India, in its earlier vision, was convinced that investing in higher education is in the long-term interest of the country, then it should put its money where its mouth is. It should find the resources to fund higher education through taxation of the well-to-do. Are you aware that the marginal rate of taxation of the corporate sector, when it actually pays taxes, that is, as opposed to the official 35% or 33% rate of taxation. The effective rate of taxation is about 19%, because there's a plethora of exemptions. You have a government that is negotiating with Vodafone, try and see how it can bail out Vodafone on the tax dispute. You just can't have it both ways. You have to have some consistency in this argument. I would argue that the appropriate fee for IIT is not something that one can determine the back of the envelope calculations. One cannot do a cost-based calculation because that will just be too high for anybody to pay. If you do a cost-based calculation, it's quite okay if the government were to put in place mechanisms that ensure that the high-quality human resources generated by the IITs is made to serve the country in some way or the other. One can look at possible mechanisms there, but that's again, as I keep saying, a separate issue. Right now, we need to understand that this present mode of tackling the government's fiscal deficit by attacking subsidies that go either to socially important causes like higher education or go to the poorer sections of the population. That is simply indefensible. All of this comes, if I may take a few minutes to say this whole obsession with reducing the government's deficit comes from an economic regime we have with us now, which is you have allowed foreign capital, foreign finance capital, money as such, to come into the country and exit whenever it wants. Once you do that, any policy measure the government undertakes is conditioned by the likely impact it will have on foreign capital which has been brought to the country. So instead of your policy being governed by what your people need, your policies are governed by what will foreign capital do if I had a larger deficit. And so a larger fiscal deficit means Moody's and Standard & Poor's may lower your rating, Moody's may do something, and so on. So the rating agencies begin to dictate the government of India's economic policies, because India becomes a lousy zone for investment if your fiscal deficit is X or Y or Z. And so in a democracy where you elect the government reports to the rating agencies. That's a very odd situation to be in. So we need to tackle that problem of how, to what extent are we going to allow ourselves to be run by a bunch of speculators in global capital markets? To what extent are we going to assert our right to run our country the way we want to run it? And that's a larger issue of macroeconomic policy, which I can't deal with here, but I want you to know these issues exist. And they have a lot to do with the way we define deficit and so on. That's a very intricate question, and I hope I'll get an opportunity to come back among you to discuss the Indian economy in some detail. It's quite interesting. It's not as boring as you might think. It can be quite interesting if we can find the time to discuss it. But right now, I won't get into it. But be assured that a resource crunch is not a convincing argument for not supporting higher education if you believe that higher education is important for the country in the future. And in that sense, I would say that the government of India should reconsider its approach to the question of fees, not just in the IITs, but in general in higher education. It should seriously reconsider its abdication of responsibility in the domains of education and health. Because privatization of education and health in the current sense, in the sense not of a mere change of management, but in the sense of education being turned into a profit-driven activity. That's what privatization means. If you privatize the education sector by allowing private agents to come in and charge fees as they see fit, and if you allow them to legitimately make huge profits from this enterprise, then that disease will inevitably come to the government institutions. This is why universities offer self-financing courses. This is why government colleges offer self-financing courses. So the moment you allow privatization in a profit-driven society is inevitably commercialization. No point in crying after you let the door open. So we really need to ask the question, why is the government privatizing education and health in the manner it does? Why is it commercializing it? Not in the old philanthropic sense of private philanthropists, allowing education to be run by honest teachers. That's a very different ballgame. Currently, this is what we are facing, and my own view is that the path that we've been pursuing, particularly since the early 90s, in a global context, it has changed dramatically because India felt that it could no longer rely on international balance of forces to get access to technologies and resources, and therefore it went for a route of integrating the Indian economy totally with the world economy, a route which has taken us from a point in 1991 when the sum of your imports and exports was only 1/7 of your GDP, to a point now where it is about 50% of your GDP. You're far more vulnerable now. And that is the context in which foreign finance capital becomes critical. It is ironic if you look at it, because in 1991 we went for neoliberal reforms. We made the argument that we had to do it because we have a balance of payments crisis. Our exchange earnings are not enough to meet our import needs. And we have a fiscal crisis. Government doesn't have enough money to spend. 22 years down the line, the Prime Minister is saying the same thing. We are in a fiscal crisis. We are in a balance of payments crisis. So what have we done for 22 years? Simple question to ask is this path sustainable? And I would argue that while today we are discussing the IIT fee, the larger issue inevitably, although some people may not like the term neoliberal and all that, and it might be jargon to them, but the larger issue is, are we going to have a path of development that is centered on the needs of the Indian people and that integrates with the world economy on its own terms and not in a completely surrenderist manner? And if so, what does it entail for macroeconomic policy? That's one set of questions which I'm not dealing with today, I'll come back to it. But today I want to say therefore that in the logic of things, raising fees by 80% in IITs is really not needed for government of India. That's really not how they're going to solve the fiscal crisis. And there are other ways of addressing the fiscal crisis, which is more by tackling taxation and evasion. And therefore, I would say that in that sense, you should continue to appeal to the Government of India to reconsider its decision. Thank you.
Good evening, friends. I'm an activist and an advocate. I feel I'm not very expert in the higher education. We are dealing with some school education and we are making some struggle and making some cases, some public interest litigations. In the experience out of this, I like to share some of my experience and some of the privatization, how it affects in various aspects of social life, including higher education. Your fee structure is increased. For BTech students, it was increased up to 80%, 50,000 fees. Instead of they need to pay 90,000, and for higher education, they need to pay 8,200 or 100% hike. Young professors say, out of this fiscal deficit, from every student, if they collect 4,000 or 50,000, the government can't equate the deficit by this. But if you go through the Kakoda committee, most of you might know that every student's cost of every student is around 7.5 lakh to 8 lakh. They are only want to take the operational expenditure initially, according to the recommendation by the committee. Only they are taking 2 to 2.5 lakh. They are planning, so they need to increase every year. They need to collect up to 2 to 2.5 lakh initially, according to the committee. Later, the privatization want to take the whole amount from the students because the government want. I come to that point later. For the purpose to reach that amount, they are collecting and they are starting to collect some small amount initially. So it is not a matter of 4,000, 40,000. They have a plan. They have a new education policy. The earlier policy in 60s, 70s is completely changed now. In every sphere of life, it is completely changed in the entire world. And it affects our nation also. After 1990s, the entire economic and political scenario was changed. Earlier, the education, they provided education. Most of our parents studied in the government schools. Most of you also studied in the government schools. Earlier you said. On the time, government schools, everyone studied, everyone got good education. But now, you might know that the private school education, every law, professor said one thing, MHRD said nobody is, they need, if they have no money, if they have a stuff and there are a lot of means to get stipends and a lot of other means. But in government schools, in private schools, they have a fees determination committee They have a lot of Right to Education Act. A child below the age of 14 years, she or he cannot deny his right. That is the law. But in practical, most of the schools we visited and we are taking the cases, if they are not paying the fees fixed by the private schools, the government fees is, for example, the government fixed the fees for 10,000 for a class. The school fixed at 30,000. If you are not paying the 30,000, they send away the schools children, or they put them on kneel down, or they given the TC. Every day cases are filing in the High Court. Even today, a school in the Prof, they have sent 18 students out of the school because they are not paying the fees fixed by the private schools. But they pay the fees according to the government tariff. I am saying the cruelty of the privatization is sending out a child of age of 7 years. She is sending out of the school. That is the cruelty of the privatization in education is running all over the school education. Every lot of problems are going there. They are only making money. It is a business. It is not a charitable purpose. No. In the past they are using as a charitable purpose. Now it is not as a charitable purpose. They are earning money. It is a big business. Most of the criminals and most of the anti-social elements now enter into these education institutions, and they are making their big educational gains. Such type because how the privatization works in engineering college around the city, we are witnessing how they are crushing. There is no private education institution giving a standard education. It never proves in India. Not even any private institutions. If we want to communicate a letter to Kanyakumari to Kashmir, we will send through 50 paise, a postcard. It is in the public sector. Public sector is very accessible to the people and very cheap. It is formed according for the welfare of the people. Now everything changed. It is huge cost for a courier. You might know that. Every government public sectors were very accessible and very cheap. But after the changing of the economic policy, 1990s, after that, all the public sectors were killed for the purpose of the development of the private institutions, private public sectors. Everyone knows that. The successful private, first they put up the argument. It gives the quality. The private institutions give a very good service. They are all putting up the arguments like that. They only give you a fine service according to the world standard. But in reality, the private institutions never give the standard, the quality. They are exploiting the people continuously. Everything, every sphere of life, you can take it. So, in this scenario of IIT, they are increasing the tariff. They are going to collect the expenditure, running expenditure from the students. It is the initial step. Private Right to Education Act, a provision for 25% of every private education institutions give a reservation to the economically poor and backward community. It is the responsibility of the government. The responsibility of the government to run the education institutions is they want to relieve from that. I will give concession, I will give money, I will give stipend. The government relieve from their responsibility to provide education, to provide health, to provide electricity, to provide water, to provide food. It doesn't mean people are beggars and would seek government for everything. Every government, every social welfare government should equal platform. To all people, they should give equal platform. For the 60 years of so-called socialist state, they never give an equal platform for a 5-year-old child. They didn't give equal platform for a first standard. For the 60 years long effort, they never give. They initiate after 1950s, they make a lot of public sectors and they make basic infrastructures. They put up railroads, they put up stations, they put up tracks, and now they are going to sell all railways to run a train. That is called privatization. They make all infrastructure out of the poorest people, their resource, their work, their taxes. They get resources and they suck their blood and give it to the private. That is called privatization. In all educational institutions or any other institutions, you might be know that the power cut in Tamil Nadu for the last 1 year, most Chennai people don't affect from that. Only 2 hours cut or less than 2 hours in a very important area. If you are living in that, you didn't feel that power cut. But in rest of Tamil Nadu, they are facing 8 hours to 12 hours power cut. For this, government saying there is a power deficit. We are not producing to the need of the society. We are not able to produce that. But in reality, for up to 1998, every year government making new plans and increasing the production of the electricity. After that, the policy of the government changed. They are only giving permit to the private electricity companies. They are giving permission to the 5 companies. Our public sector electricity produces maximum up to 2.5 rupees for a production of the 1 unit. But they purchased up to 6 rupees, 8 rupees, 11 rupees and 17 rupees. They purchased and sell it for the 3 rupees, including corporates and households. 3 rupees. That makes the loss for the, in 2005, electricity board running in profit. In 2007 to 2012, every year they are making loss to 5,000 crores and at the end 2012 they are deficit of 56,000 crores. Now the electricity board not able to pay the amount to the private runners, to the banks. So they are not able to purchase from the private sectors. They are giving penalties for the private sectors for keeping idle for their plants. The reality is not able to procure, not able to purchase electricity, not because of the non-production. This is the cruelty of the electricity. Story from the electricity we are facing every day throughout the Tamil Nadu, 10 hours, 12 hours power cut. Not because of non-production, because of the private players and their profit. The private players only making production and get the coal from the government, using the government cables, using the every infrastructure made by the electricity board, infrastructure made by the public sector. But they are only production. They have no new technology. This is what the private players exploiting. In the way, every law was changed. For this purpose, the Electricity Act was changed amended in 2003. Yeah, it was in 1948. Every sector, if you taking it a LIC, all private players making worse and exploiting, it makes public in 1970s, 60s, 70s. And now it was privatized. 49% private players. All the companies are running loss. So, in education institutions, they are coming. It is a huge market. According to them, it is a market. I already told you, a student's expenditure is around 7.5 to 8 lakhs. This is the, if you collect from the lakhs, thousands of people, that is the market. That is giving government, the government is giving free of cost or very minimum amount. So they want to, it is a big market. How to collect, how to procure this market. So they are planning, so they make a policy. Lot of acts are there, new amendment acts, everything was changed. Every day they are making a bill to change the policy. From last 20 years, they are making new laws every day to change the policy, to change up to the world IMF on the world institutions, corporations, pressures. That is the first step. First step, they are insisting us to, it is not my duty. Giving education is not my duty, that is government duty. It is yours. It is your duty to get education. You should get education in private school, private college, anything else. You should pay. Because, in Catholic committee, they have an equation. How you balanced? Most of the IITs who came out of the institutions got more than 6 lakh package per annum. It is not very difficult to repay the loan amount. They are giving equation. They are speaking you the business. They are not speaking about the quality of the education, future of the nation. They are not speaking about how to make an expert. They are not to make how to make a very good engineer or very good experts, very good brain. They are speaking a business. You will get a very good package. Why should I pay for you? That is the logic they are made. So the package, the business, the career. Careerism is importing there. So it is not of the values. They eroded the previous values. Every day we should meet the people reflecting from this culture. We are making a new culture. Out of this economic policy, people's culture is also changing. So it is not a matter of 4,000 or 40,000 or 5 lakh. It is a matter of education and to right to get the education. So every part of the students or every part of the people are struggling for their right. Most of the school parents are fighting for the excess fees, and they are for the we already fight for the uniform education syllabus. The government make a uniform syllabus. Lot of private players make lot of things. Government make a uniform syllabus for all the schools, but still the private schools carrying the name for matriculation schools. There is no board at all. The matriculation board was not at all. There is no syllabus as matriculation, but they still carrying the board because to collect the money, to extract the money from people. So it is the responsibility of the education, providing education, and responsibility to give health. It is all up to the government. It is all up to the state to provide their future generation. They should give equal platform to study, to educate. Then only they have the wide options to select and to serve for the country. It is not to study and go for earning. Nowadays, even from my school days, and you might be here your school days also, study well, get better, get a good job. That is the new value they are taught. But what we educate, what we study, what we are reciprocal to the society. I studied from a government law college. I paid only 5,000 fees for the entire 5 years, and I pay only 18,000 for my post-graduation, ML. I got my education out of only 25,000. So I am ready. I have no loans while I come for a profession. I need not go and exploit the people to get money, more money. So how I will do my profession? What is the problem? What is the legal problem? What is the problem in society? What should I do? I will think over it. If I have a loan of 10 lakhs, what will I think? How can I earn? Going for a corporate as a legal offence. So we should seek for a new values, new economic policy. We should fight for it. The peoples are fighting outside. So we should join hands and we should make a good society and healthy, good value society. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it's thank you all the speakers. Yeah, if any of the speakers would like to have a comeback on any of the specific issues raised, now is the time, and anyone. No, we'll go to the audience after that. First of all, within the panel.
Has ability to raise resources beyond what it is doing now, but that's kind of a completely tangential topic, I think, to what we're talking about. But just to hit on that, there is enough evidence from the US and elsewhere too that cutting corporate taxes beyond a certain level is counterproductive for the simple reason that If you cut their taxes, their profits will go into pocket. And if you raise their taxes, then they will feel the urge to reinvest and thereby employ more people. So this is sort of elementary logic that the Americans have brainwashed people into forgetting, and the Indians have also forgotten. But that is not really relevant to the question of should an Indian be asked to pay for a high quality education. Or you could say the government must give you everything for free. And that seems to be more or less what the second speaker was saying, that Mr. Milton suggests that, back in the 1980s you could send a postcard across the country and everything. I wish we had a time machine to go back to the 1980s, because I lived in Delhi. It's not some backwater, it's the capital of India. My parents booked a telephone in 1984 and received it in 1991. That was the state of things then. I remember the power problems at that time. You could say that there were no power cuts, but large parts of the country were not even electrified. Now today Tamil Nadu is almost entirely electrified, but even today UP and Bihar, that huge tracts of those places don't have electricity. There is no question of power cuts there. If you look at mobile phones, pretty much everyone you meet now, from your vegetable seller to rickshawala, has a mobile phone. And if you ask them, go back to the 1980s when you had to depend on BSNL or MTNL to give you basic connectivity, and they will harass you for bribes and so on. So there is a country where the government gives you everything. It's called North Korea. And back in the 80s there was another country called the USSR. You would see telephone images of people queuing for television images, people queuing for bread, and things that you don't see here. Let's not completely belittle private enterprise. It is absolutely necessary in any civilized country. The government has a responsibility to support the people, but not to spoon feed the people. If you look at healthcare in Europe and so on, the government runs hospitals, but it does not run every damn hospital. What it does is provide health insurance to enable people to get quality healthcare when they need it. These are basic things that we lack in this country. The government has abdicated responsibilities in these aspects. Therefore, we demand that the government, take over every other aspect of our life as a kind of the government has proved its failure in so many areas. I think we should be thinking of ways to change the system. Right, that's...
I was inclined to respond, but now that comments have been made which take us very far away from the agenda of today, one is compelled to respond even very briefly. First of all, I think one can't talk about a government in the abstract. The government obviously in this country is voted in by you and me, but run by somebody else. We can start there. Basically, very powerful economic interests dictate government policy, both in the pre-1991 period and in the post-1991 period. So much of what is being ascribed as government failure is really the capture of government by a very small minority of powerful economic interests. And that's about to happen again. The answer to that is much larger political and social mobilization. We're not discussing that here. And let's also not go back to history and make comparisons, which, your comparisons are as mine. I have a different experience, you have a different experience. So let's not get sidetracked. Let's come back to the issue at hand. And what is the issue at hand? That there is a committee which has been constituted by the Government of India. I don't know who was invited to provide inputs to that committee. That committee has come out with a report which in principle wants to cover the entire operational fees from expenses from student fees. And as Milton rightly said, today it might be 4,000, tomorrow it is 40,000, the next day it's 4 lakhs. So we're not looking at a picture at one point in time, we're looking at the principle that the entire operational cost of IITs will be covered from student fees. I can't imagine a more ridiculous idea. When it's the IIT with any other place. It's really absurd idea. This has nothing to do with government giving freebies. By the way, I find it insulting when people say that government providing healthcare services is giving things free. I made the point in my presentation that 65% of taxes are indirect taxes, and they are paid by the poor working people of this country. Let's face it. Now we are getting away from that. The corporate sector pays less than 3% of GDP as income tax. And it's not just the US has fooled us into thinking this. In a world where capital is mobile, to move from one place to another, there is a race to the bottom among countries in trying to lower tax rates. So much as you may dislike the word neoliberal, this is a neoliberal world where private footloose capital calls the shots. And it says to any government, if you don't want to offer me the best terms I want, I'll go somewhere else. So you have tax havens. You have a minister in the parliament telling us that the tax arrears, this is about a few months ago, was 2.7 lakh crores in this country. And believe me, that was not the end of that. Supplementing the answer by saying that, but we think we can only recover 65,000 crores. So the rest of 1.78 lakh crores goes into Gandhi's account or what? So this is the, this is the reality we are taking. I didn't want to get into all this. Let's face it, let's not get into larger issues of what is the right economic system for the whole world. I'm not here to pontificate on that. But I'm very clear that in relation to the issue at hand, fees are not going to cover operational expenses anyway, any day. So why trust something on students without even the modicum of a discussion? All the students are asking for is the process of discussion. At the very beginning, let's talk to us, tell us what, listen to us. And I think it's not a sin for you to ask them to listen to you guys. I think they should listen to you guys. There should be a proper discussion. I think there's fairness in your argument that this arbitrary large fee increase, which may be the first of many to come, cannot be taken lying down. It has to be addressed, it has to be faced. And I think larger issues of education and who funds it and so on can be raised later. I mean, I agree. I'm not going to solve all issues here. Maybe Milton put it in his own way and that maybe some of it could have been put differently. But and nobody is saying that government should do everything for everybody here. That's the import of what is being drawn. Maybe that's not quite the way it was come. Maybe the way of communicating it might have led to that impression. But we are saying that the rich in this country must pay taxes. They must not be allowed to evade them. We are saying that if India is to get the best out of global resources and technologies, it must fight for a more equitable global regime. One where technology is not a monopoly of the advanced countries, one where finance is not a monopoly of international institutions, one where markets are not dominated by multinationals, one where the media are not controlled by a handful of global giants. We are demanding a more democratic international economic order. Likewise, we demand a more democratic internal economic order. That's a larger issue. As I said, I would love to come back and talk to you if I get a chance. But today, I'm going to stick only to the fee question. I think you have every right to ask for reconsideration.
I didn't mean for spoon feed or free meals. Okay. For the last 60 years, most particularly for the last 20 years, private players they will exploit the country, they will exploit the poor and everything. And according to them, the entire policy was changing. The price hike of IIT is part of that. Because you should pay for your education. That is the concept. For that, we will see for the coal scam, private players, wherever they go, they make a big scam. They will corrupt politicians. They will exploit people's resources. Because a lot of resources in the country, even in telecom, everyone knows that. Lot of exploitation. Everywhere private players go, they exploit the people, even in education. So they make the values for their favor. The value is pay for your education. That is, we should not pay for our education. For every child, for every adult, the government should pay. Government should equal platform. After that, everyone earn and they'll afford a very good life. That is not a matter. So everyone would get an equal platform. Constitution speaks about equality, but they never give an equal platform. For later period, in constitutions, they have a directive principles for the right to education. It is only in the directive principles. It is not a right. Later it converted and diluted. Now the right is up to 6 to 14 years, a child get a right for education. Not for higher studies. It is not your right. It changed. The constitution changed. The law changed. Through the periods, everything changed. The private players and the corporates changed the policy. That's why we should look at it in a way. For this hike, there is a very good players behind that. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, so we are throwing the session open. So, Okay, we are throwing the session open, but as I said, please be brief on your question, brief and direct. Don't take more than 1 minute for a question.
Okay, I'm going to use the 1 minute. First, Commonwealth Games was not a private thing. So, I mean, there are, and the F1 race was privatized, and one went better than the other. So, not all private institutions are bad either. Second thing, yes, I am against privatization of education. For example, if IITs are not making profit and we were running on such a loss, why did they start 10 new IITs? They could have just kept it as an elite institute and kept a few IITs and also not diluted the quality by moving the profs all around. So that's a big problem I see. And the second thing is, you can see how the medical colleges went in Tamil Nadu. I mean, private medical colleges are there and nobody wants to go and serve the villages anymore. And I think the same thing will happen. We need more startups. We don't need more people. Okay, my feet are trembling. We don't need more people working for Microsoft, right? We need more people starting Microsoft over here, even by the private argument. So if I am on a loan, I am going to join the company that pays me most. I am not going to go and join Bark.
Is that a question or a comment?
No, that's a comment.
Okay, do you have a question to someone specific?
The question in particular is, why were there more IITs started when you were not able to run the existing IITs in a good way?
Okay, who is it directed to? Okay, any of the panelists can.
You know, my view is that for a country as large as India, we can do with many more IITs. I said that earlier, and I stand by that. But the point is for the government to say now that we don't have the money to run 5 or 10. That's a different problem. You ask me how many do we need? That's a different question. Okay? All right.
Yes, I endorse that we need more IITs, we need more real universities. That is what I would say. We don't have enough real universities. And the government has a duty to provide these things. Now, all over the world, there are things like the University of Paris or University of California or whatever. There are state universities. There are private universities. They each have their own role. And I feel nobody is actually talking about privatizing the IITs in that sense. What they are suggesting is charging a realistic fee. So I was saying privately to Venkatesh just now, he's saying, 60% of our tax revenues are from the poor working class. I could turn that around and ask, why should they pay for the education for somebody who is going to an IIT and getting 24 lakhs a year at the end of it? So,
Sir, here is the point. I have a point in this. Can I just say? To your, when we say that...
Can we have, an order?
Yeah,
so that, let's take a few questions together.
I'm in the order. Okay. I forgot to say, I fully agree that we need private entrepreneurship. So, sir, to your point I'm making, when you are saying that students are getting that much salary and whatever they are, so is the same point, just I am extending. We have the demographic dividend we are saying, but with this huge population, can we employ all? We can't employ. Government can't employ. Okay. So what is the thing I come across means entrepreneurship is the key for the growth of our country. So.
Is that a comment or a question?
Yeah, I mean, into question also, and comment to his point also, that with such a loan on our head, can I think of being an entrepreneur? Means with a huge loan on my head, can I generate employment for others when my employment is in danger? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take a few more questions and let the panelists respond after that. Let's say 2 more in one round.
Sir, my point is to Rahul sir. Sir, as you told that people who can pay, let them pay, and people who cannot pay, MHRD and Government of India is going to help them. Sir, on one hand, they formulate an equation that all the operational cost has to be taken from the student. On what basis they make this limit 4.5 or 4.6 lakh per annum. Family who is earning this much, below that they will be helped by the government, and above that they cannot. Do you think, sir, is it justified the family who is earning 6.5, 7.5 up to 10 lakh per annum, will they afford 2.5 lakh per semester or per year for a student in IIT? Is he having a particular son, only one son or daughter in his family? My first point. Second point, sir, I'll tell you what.
We cannot keep track of so many points per question. Can everybody please ask one question?
No, I'll just add to it, sir. I'll just add to it this one. The government is trying to, I'll just finish my point. Government is trying to privatize the education in IIT, particularly in IIT, government organization. At the same time, simultaneously, my point is you privatize the stipend paid to the PG student also. Make it as private standard. Why 8,000? The stipend that you give me, it will be according to the government, and what you take from me, it will be according to the private. What is this? Nonsense. Second point. Let me complete. The third point is,
excuse me,
I'll just add, it is from on the behalf of the student. The students who are sitting here, they are against this topic. So let me just add only one point. And the third point is, you are talking about the service to the country, sir. You are extracting us, the students are paying the money. You are talking about service to the country. My proposal is, the most intellectual people from different IITs, the professors, the scientists, they went to that stupid committee and they write the report like this dear Mr. Simple, who is the most corrupt person sitting in the government, that, sir, we accept your proposal. We accept your proposal and we will take money from the student. Instead, they would have taken out and made out some reasonable justified solution, and it could be that after completing your education, undergraduate education, you compulsory make a student to work in a government organization for 2 to 3 years.
Excuse me,
that will be
none of our panelists were part of that committee. I don't
No, I'm not.
I just want to say this. I am not a faculty member at IIT. I am not in the MHRD. I do not feel that I have any duty to answer these questions. Thank you very much.
I am a faculty member here, and I'm telling you, don't destroy this meeting. Okay? I'm not destroying.
Okay, so please stick on to a point. I said at the outset itself. Stick on to the point and take only 1 minute for a question. If you have a specific question, then only ask. Let's keep the emotions aside. And yeah, we'll take one more.
Yeah, this is more a comment just to put this in balance. I think in a mature premier institute of a country where the students are postgraduates, I think we need to have a more balanced discussion. Sometimes, probably one suggestion is that when a panel discussion is being held, if the people who are, you can elicit their viewpoints beforehand and probably try to compose a balanced panel, which will have both, both sides and more focused. That is one. And if we can avoid rhetoric and unnecessary rhetoric and propaganda, because there are other forums outside where this propaganda and rhetoric can be taken care of, right? And now to place the topic in perspective, I think what is the issue is we all came here trying to understand, what are the implications of the fee hike. I don't think that has got answered. Instead, we have been talking about some mega issues about privatization and so on. So, that it hasn't been focused at all. So, and that is quite visible in the way the response happened, that when, the one missing link I feel is, the issue is looked at in black and white. That means it is looked at that all privatization are bad, and that was quite visible, and it's quite logical also to put things in perspective. Because what has happened, the undergraduate education is pretty bad, and most of them, those colleges are run by, what was the term you used, sir? The last speaker, you said a particular term which led to a lot of claps. Yeah, anti-social. Not all private organizations are of the same kind. Okay, so there needs to be a more balanced understanding of what privatization consists of. So it's not, so unfortunately what has happened at the postgraduate level, most of the people have experienced those who are those kind of people in those colleges, owned by those kind of people, and when they come over to a postgraduate level, they
I was asked to participate in the panel on privatization of higher education, and after some back and forth, I made it clear that I'm not going to be spending much time about fee hikes at IIT because that is not something I am competent to talk about. The understanding was that it is on privatization of higher education, and I believe that's what I spoke about.
The topic is privatization of higher education in reference with the fees hike in IIT. It is very different. It is not everywhere. If you take what is the reason behind, what is the policy behind that, what is the reality in the nation. If you restrict it, if you confine to the